Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're exploring a seriously fascinating and honestly a highly specific framework for understanding exactly how the universe balances itself out. We're going to be looking at a 2024 philosophical treatise written by Zhu Feng. It's titled The Scope of Application of the Law of Positive and Negative Energy Summing to Zero. Now, this is a text that blends physics metaphors, Eastern philosophy, and spiritual cosmology to try and answer one of humanity's oldest, most nagging questions: is the universe fundamentally fair? The author actually lays out this incredibly strict zero-sum cosmic accounting system. And whether you view it as literal truth or just a really compelling philosophical thought experiment, the architecture of this argument is incredibly detailed. We're going to break down exactly how this text argues that every single blessing and every single hardship in the universe mathematically balances out to a perfect zero. Okay, let's dive into this. We really need to look at the central dialectic puzzle we're being presented with here. Now, you know the basic physics concept, right? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. But the author takes this principle completely out of the realm of physical forces and applies it directly to the human experience. So think about it. If the universe requires perfect balance, does that mean your personal happiness must literally be paid for by an exact, mathematically equivalent amount of pain? It's a hugely provocative question, and to really grasp the author's answer, we kind of have to start right at the foundational rule of this universe. So we are kicking things off with Section 1, the Universal Zero-Sum Law. This is the primary thesis that drives this entire philosophy. The text immediately trains us to view the cosmos through a lens of strict, uncompromising dualities. According to the author, the universe operates on an inescapable binary. Basically, if there's a positive universe, there absolutely has to be a negative universe. If positive energy exists, well, negative energy has to exist to balance it. A positive electron is perfectly mirrored by a negative electron. And the wild part is, this extends all the way up into consciousness and spirituality. If there are people, there are anti-people. If there are gods, there are demons. If there is a heaven, there must inevitably be a hell. This framework leaves absolutely zero room for a one-sided existence. Everything, and I mean everything, has a shadow, a perfect counterweight. Which brings us to the core equation of the whole treatise. Giving plus gaining equals zero. The author defines this law as the ultimate balance mechanism of the universe. It's there to ensure that the development of absolutely anything can't just spiral out into chaotic extremes. In this worldview, this mathematical balance isn't just cold hard physics, it actually embodies the justice of Tao. By understanding and applying this law, the text asserts that we can comprehend the very mechanism of nature itself. Basically, nothing is free, and honestly, nothing is ever truly lost. But of course, any absolute rule immediately invites us to look for the loopholes, right? The author anticipates this entirely in Section 2, the Heaven and Hell Paradox, where we look at microscopic versus macroscopic balance. If the sum of positive and negative energy is truly zero across the board, then we are forced to ask some pretty difficult questions. Is happiness plus pain zero? Is love plus hate zero? What about cruelty plus kindness? Is that zero? If the macro universe is perfectly balanced on a grand scale, does that mean the micro experience of an individual life has to balance out precisely to zero as well? Now, what's really interesting about this is how these two extremes present the ultimate microscopic edge cases that seem to just completely break the author's own rule. The text points out a very obvious paradox within its own cosmology. On one hand, you have the supercelestial beings in the Elysium world. According to the text, these beings enjoy eternity without a single worry, no pain, and they are never, ever punished. But on the exact opposite side, you have lives trapped in hell, enduring eternal pain with absolutely zero joy. If you zoom in on a single life form in either of these extreme states, the happiness plus pain equals zero formula seems to fall apart entirely, doesn't it? One has all positive, the other has all negative. It makes it look like the law only works on the grand, cosmic scale, but completely fails the individual. So, how does the author resolve this? Let's move to Section 3, the cost of eternal joy, and dive into the strict standards required to make this math work. The author emphatically states that the law absolutely does hold true at the microscopic individual level. No one gets to enjoy eternal bliss for absolutely no reason, and no one suffers eternally for no reason either. So how is Elysium justified? Well, the text explains that to actually reach the standards required to enter heaven, a life must undergo an incredibly difficult, immensely painful process up front. The spiritual criteria are so rigorous and the trials are so severe that it's basically considered a miracle if even 1% of humans ever meet the standard. Therefore, the formula happiness plus pain equals zero
is established, but sequentially. The intense, concentrated pain required to achieve the standard perfectly balances the scales, paying in full for the eternal happiness that eventually follows. But wait, what about the other 99% of us? This leads us to Section 4, the Bank of Heaven, comparing the short term versus eternity. To explain the fate of those who don't meet that rigorous standard, the text uses a surprisingly grounded, everyday economic analogy. And this brilliantly illustrates the concept of spiritual debt as laid out in the text. The author compares our spiritual lives to a person living paycheck to paycheck. Think about it. If you prioritize short-term happiness and joy, actively avoiding the painful spiritual work required for heaven, you're essentially going to work, earning your daily joy, and spending it all immediately. Because you save literally nothing in the bank of heaven, you have zero capital to fund an eternal life of bliss. The results, according to the text, is endless suffering and endless reincarnation. There's just no end in sight, because you keep consuming your positive energy in the short term, never letting the scale tip in a way that allows for actual long-term spiritual wealth. This naturally brings us to Section 5, the price of wealth. If the universe demands perfect balance, how on earth do we explain the worldly paradox of the ultra-wealthy? I mean, we all look around and see wealthy individuals who seem to live lives of absolute extreme luxury without enduring much pain or torment at all. It feels like a total glitch in the zero-sum law. But the author argues that this is merely a perceived reality. The law hasn't failed, we are just completely blind to the full picture. The text contrasts our surface-level assumptions with a hidden reality, asserting that this worldly wealth actually masks a tremendous, unseen burden and a very, very bleak spiritual future. The author details exactly what this unseen burden is made of. First, the text claims the wealthy shoulder far more risk, unseen pressures, and severe mental and spiritual strain than the average person. This intense psychological torment actually entitles them to their temporary material wealth, but the cosmic cost is incredibly steep. The text explicitly argues that the wealthier a person is, the greater their responsibility for the destruction of nature. Simply put, more money equals greater sin. The more material wealth possessed, the heavier the spiritual sin, which directly leads to far more severe punishment in the future. Because of this perfect, inescapable accounting, the text concludes with a really stark warning. You should never envy or admire the rich. Actually, you should pity them. Which brings us nicely to Section 6, Total Cosmic Balance. This brings the entire dialectic structure to its final, overarching conclusion. So the crucial point is that in this specific philosophical framework, the zero-sum law is absolute and inescapable. It applies to everything: the birth of universes, the flow of tiny electrons, the eternal fate of souls in Elysium or hell, and even the daily lives of the ultra-wealthy. The text insists that in a perfectly just universe governed by Tao, there are absolutely no unprovoked blessings, and there are absolutely no unprovoked sins. Everything is earned, everything is paid for, and the final sum is always, always mathematically zero. The text closes by directly addressing those who look at the suffering in the world and complain that the Creator is just being unfair. The author asks this final, incredibly provocative question: who is actually willing to heed the call, endure the painful trials required to meet the highest standards, and walk the path? If you choose to disregard the difficult path and instead just complain about the perceived injustice of your own struggles, can you really blame the cosmic balance? It's a challenging thought from the text to leave you with, forcing us all to consider exactly what we might be willing to pay for eternal joy. Thanks for joining me on this explainer of cosmic balance.